on, everybody? This is Corvin, the Serpentine Skipwith, and I'm here with very special guest, Ben Christo. How are you going?
Hey Corbin, how are you, man?
Yeah, not too bad. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. Yeah, sorry for that terrible beginning where I completely messed it up. So thank you for your kindness in being able to use your wonders of technology to make me sound like I've actually got a modicum of intelligence. I appreciate
Nah, it's all good. It was the most entertaining intro we've ever had, so kudos to you.
it. Hey, if nothing else, I entertain.
Yes, yes. All right. So, the beginning of this interview, I just want to start where all things start, the beginning. What was your childhood like, and what was the music scene for you growing up?
Um, well, I grew up in Bristol, which is in the West Country of England, and it's a cool town. You know, it's a decent sized town with lots of history and music scene. And so I was lucky in that sense that it wasn't London or Manchester, which are the big ones, but it certainly had enough going on for me to get in bands and go and start playing shows. And there was enough people around that were into alternative music. It wasn't a huge alternative music scene, but there was people. And what was nice was that when we started out doing bands, we would do all dayers, which would be something that you do on a Saturday or Sunday. First band on at maybe midday, all through the day. And throughout those all days, that we would have such a cool mix of subgenres of bands. There would be like ska punk, skate punk, goth, metal, new metal, hip hop, and all kind of these alternative genres. And everyone would just come along and watch all the bands, you know, come and go and stuff. But it was just a really good vibe. There wasn't any kind of real sort of scene segregation in that sense. And I remember the way that I used to dress at the time. I was an amalgamation of like black eyeliner, black nail varnish, but I used to wear like Hawaiian shirts and I had a devil lock. And it was this kind of brilliant combination of just I'm alternative and that's it. Um, so that was cool. It was cool to be in that environment. And then I eventually left because I felt like I'd sort of reached a ceiling point of that town, which I think a lot of people do. And then I moved to London because I wanted to start a new band. I knew London was a good place to go, if only for the fact that there would be countless other people doing what I was doing from other places, moving to the capital to try and start a new band. But yeah, Bristol's a great town and a great music scene and great culture. I think the only thing for me that I found a bit of a struggle when I was growing up was in the 90s was that I kind of got into a lot of 80s music really late. So by the time that I was listening to and I was well into all my 80s music, it was already it was like the 90s and that had become very passe to like 80s music. So I found it very difficult in the early 90s to find bands that I liked. Um, and it wasn't until the mid to late 90s that I really found like new artists that I could alternative rock artists that I could really enjoy. Because in the early 90s, a lot of alternative guitar music was either for me too kind of limp and indie, or it was so extreme metal and it was very kind of machismo and very kind of aggressively masculine. There wasn't anything really in between. Um, so I struggled for a bit with my musical identity. And I mean, you'll know as a music fan that when you grow up, what the music you like is a huge part of who you are. It defines your friendship groups, the way you dress, your ethos, the movies you watch, the book you read. And I kind of struggled to find a place. So I was alternative, but I was alternative in a way that wasn't really part of any group because I liked music that was seemed to be out of date and out of fashion. So even even though I couldn't even be in like the kind of unpopular crowd of alternative people because I didn't even like anything that they liked. Um, but eventually, when I got to college and I found a lot of bands that alternative bands that were new, I was introduced to that I really liked. Then yeah, it all kind of came together.
Yeah. It's really interesting because, you're my first guest where I researched about you and you seem like a natural prodigy, It's insane. Is it true that you were playing music at 7 years old?
Yeah, I played the piano um, quite badly. I mean, it was just a real. I remember it being a chore. It was a sense of right. Here's your homework. You need to sit down. You need to write out the notes and play these very simple little tunes. And I wasn't particularly inspired. I had an uncle who's 8 years older than me, so he's like a big brother, and he was into like rock and metal, and I really was inspired by him. So when I was about 10, I started playing guitar, and I was very fortunate that my parents got me an electric to start on. So it meant that instantly I could start trying to do what my heroes were doing, rather than go through the rigmarole of, right, here's an acoustic, and you must learn how to play all these like old songs that you don't care about. It was instantly, right, I'm going to play Judas Priest and AC/DC and the Cult and stuff. So I think quite early on, I found myself gravitating towards any music that had guitars in it. So even when you like pop songs where for one track they'd have like quite an extensive guitar solo, or there'd be a big riff in it. I would always like those songs when I was really young, and like playing air guitar and stuff. So I think if if you are going to learn an instrument, or you're going to try and introduce your kid to learning an instrument, or learning anything, doing it before you become a teenager, I think is really, really helpful. Because once you become a teenager, there's all these other factors of life that come in and start confusing your ability to focus on learning something. But I'd been playing guitar for long enough when I was a teenager that I could actually use the guitar as a way to help me through my teenage years. I could write songs about what I was feeling. Whenever I felt like dejected or down, well, at least I had the guitar. So I think it's great to start things at an early age, because then they become very quickly part of who you are as a young person. Two, having something you're passionate about as a teenager, and that you feel that you're making progress with, is hugely important to, I think, your mental health.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You hear countless stories about people who are in love with music. Like music is their thing, and it helps them through the darkest times. They go to music as as an escape, as an art form, as a sense of happiness and joy. Yeah, so like it really is the case for me as well. If I'm feeling a certain mood, I'll put music on, and it'll help me throughout the day. So I definitely
It's
understand what you're
just,
saying.
yeah, man, it's your savior, isn't it? It's your go-to. It's cathartic, isn't it? As a listener and as a performer, if you can use music as a way of a conduit for your emotions. And I'm sure you've listened. There are certain songs that have helped you a lot because you felt like, oh my God, that's the thing that I feel, but I was never able to express it in the way that you're expressing it to the artist, and it's like it's so helpful for you, right?
Yeah, yeah, I've definitely had too many of those throughout my days. um, Look, okay, so talk me about about your band AKO. What was that like? Can you tell the listener about that?
Yeah, or AKO, like it was first of all, the name came from a manga movie called Project Ako, um, which actually was A hyphen KO, and then we just later changed it to AKO. That was that was the first band, first proper band that I had, as in like we had a record deal, we went on tour, um, and that band still has a really special place in my heart. We It was like a really interesting amalgamation of skate punk, um, I guess new metal and hardcore, and 80s rock. And what I brought to it was the 80s rock. So it was these big riffs, yet we also had real fast sections, and we had like vocal harmonies, guitar solos, all around the turn of the century. Wasn't was quite unique. I guess you could say that we were like a UK version of Avenged Sevenfold, um, before, and bizarrely enough, our singer even did a couple of interviews with the singer of Avenged for like a fanzine before Avenged got big. So there was already like this connection there. And yeah, I guess we were like a UK version of that. And our peer group of bands that we would play with were bands like Funeral for a Friend. I don't know if you ever heard of them, but they're really kind of cool, where new metal and emo and hardcore were kind of, and metalcore were coming together to create something that was very guitar based again, whereas a lot of the 90s, you hadn't really been able to do riffs and solos, and suddenly it became a thing. But yeah, it was a really kind of honest and authentic amalgamation of really myself, the other guitarist, and the singer, our passion for different subgenres of alternative coming together and creating something really fresh. And it was aggressive, and it was caustic, but it was melodic, and it was memorable as well. Bouncy riffs and guitar solos and vocal harmonies, scream vocals as well as clean vocals. And our first record we got picked up from the manager of Black Sabbath, Tony Iommi of Black Sabbath. Somehow he heard it and he really liked it, and he got in contact and he started sort of tentatively chatting to us about stuff. He got this producer called Bob Marlette, who'd worked on Alice Cooper's albums, on Rob Halford's albums from Priest, Judas Priest, who was going to come and do our second record. And so for us, as like 19, 20-year-old kids, it was like, this is insane. This is how it happens. This is the big time. We make a record, we get heard, and suddenly it goes stratospheric. And for whatever reasons, it didn't happen. And then a couple of years later, the band fell apart, as is what happens with countless bands. You have this glimpse of, you hit on something, you find this formula completely by chance and by authenticity. You get the attention, something starts to pick up, and then all these other reasons come in, and it just falls apart. But that was Echo's such an important part of my life, because it was the first time I felt like I was part of a band and part of a music scene where I was credible and relevant, after going through all the 90s of feeling like no one really gets what I do. When finally my love of 80s music had a place, because it was set against this skate punk and this hardcore, which created a new sound. And it taught me about being in a band. It taught me about working with other people. It taught me about the clashes and the conflicts, and got me on the road, and we and it really helped me get to where I am now. Because when I joined the Sisters, I think what appealed to them about me was that I was an unknown artist, yet I had loads of experience. So it was that kind of nice combination for bringing into a bigger act.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, have you ever thought of the idea, like if your career would be better off had it gone through with Echo? Like, do you ever think about that?
Yeah, I think about that quite a lot, and I do wonder if it may not have gone so well. As in, I've got quite an addictive personality, so as I went through my 20s and 30s, I started having essentially an issue with alcohol, and I don't drink anymore. I've been sober for about 8 months, almost 9 months now. But I do think that if I'd had that level of success with Echo and the access to all the kind of hedonism that would come with being a successful band like that, I do wonder if it might have ended very badly for me, in terms of like maybe a major addiction, or maybe even death, without wishing to be melodramatic. But I know that I had a tendency for addictive behavior, for binging, and if I'd been exposed to that world on that level and had access to that sort of lifestyle, maybe it would have gone badly for me. At the same time, I do think if it had gone positively, we'd be on like our 10th record by now, and we would have defined a sound and maybe like helped define a genre. And but everything happens for a reason, and I think maybe it's best that it happened this way, because it gave me the experience of and the passion for being in a band, whilst keeping me alive. Because if I'd gone down that avenue, and so maybe it's melodramatic, but I do think I could have run into some difficulties had that band taken off on a more global scale.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how everyone always sees kind of the blessings after the fact. In hindsight, you don't see it at the time. At the time you're pissed. It didn't work out, all this, but then years down the line, you see that, you're like, oh shit. Well, yeah. In hindsight, that would have led to some dark roads, maybe. And so yeah, like it's always interesting to me how people see things in hindsight.
Yeah, totally, because you've got that new vantage point.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about what you briefly touched on, the Sisters of Mercy. So how did that come about? Were you a big fan of them before you joined, or did they approach you? Did you approach them? How did that go?
They were a band that was on certainly in my like top 25 bands. I wasn't a huge fan, but of the band per se. But a couple of their records, and particularly certain songs of theirs, were in my like top 10 songs of all time. So it was an odd combination of being a huge fan of certain aspects of them, but not like an obsessive, dedicated follower. And it was it was in 2005. I one day got a phone call from someone asking me to come for an audition for the band, but he wouldn't tell me what the band was and he wouldn't tell me who he was. It was all very mysterious, and I was like, "Is this a joke? Is this real?" And I spoke to a few other people at the time who were in the industry, and they said sometimes if an established, well-known band is looking for a new band member, they want to be very quiet about it because maybe they haven't told that other member yet, or more likely, and what was in this case was that there's a lot of shows lined up, and they don't want the public to think that maybe the shows won't happen. Um, that was what my understanding of it was, and so I was contacted and asked to go to this audition for a band that I didn't even know who I was auditioning for. The guy on the phone just said, "Well, it's like a combination of U2 and Motorhead. Bring your best Hendrix riffs." Um, so I went along to this thing with absolutely no expectation, and also I felt a little bit arrogant. I felt like, who the fuck are these guys? I don't, whatevs. Um, and even when I got into the room, because I hadn't seen who the lineup was, I hadn't really been following the band, and Eldritch himself is an enigma. And also, it's about context. You don't go into a room with if you don't go into a room with a certain expectation, then you don't recognize people, because people in real life look different than they do on in a video or on a record sleeve. I'll give you an example. Was that a couple of years ago I was playing in a band, and we were just in the dressing room in Toronto, and this bloke, this middle-aged bloke, just walks into the dressing room. I'm like, who's this? Just a guy just wandered in, and it took me a good sort of 10 seconds to realize it was James Hetfield, because I wasn't expecting James Hetfield to walk in. And if no one tells you that's who that person is, and you don't have that expectation of like, well, James Hetfield's coming in today, right, let's everybody be ready. And it was kind of the same for this Sisters thing. I walked into a room, and the Sisters hadn't really been in the forefront of my mind for a few years. For whatever reasons, I hadn't been listening to them, and I hadn't really been thinking about them. So it wasn't in the front of my consciousness. And it was only, and even when I was in the room, they weren't telling me who it was or who I was auditioning for. The process was that the guitarist at the time would play me a riff and say, "Can you play this riff?" And I can't play music. I'm sorry, I can't read music, but I'm very good at listening. So he'd play a riff and I'd pick it up. And in hindsight, I realized these riffs were all new stuff that hadn't been recorded, but it still had a Sisters feel to it. So because of that feel, I thought, could this be the Sisters of Mercy? All right, if it is, I'm going to play a famous Sisters riff right now on the guitar and see if anybody reacts. And so that's what I did. And one of the guys, who later I discovered was Eldritch himself, said, "That's one of our songs." And at that point, I vividly remember looking at my hands, and my hands were shaking. I was so nervous, but it was okay because I'd had half an hour, 45 minutes of just being in the room, being like, who are these guys? Don't care. And feeling just like confident and playing and not phased at all. So in hindsight, I'm actually quite grateful that there was that secrecy around it, because it meant that I could really just be myself.
Wow. I also heard that you later down the line you were able to write songs with Eldridge himself. Correct?
That's right. Yeah. So what we've been doing on the last this tour that we've been doing this year has been pretty much 50% songs that we've written, myself, Dylan, and Andrew together. And it's really exciting, and it's such an honor to be writing for something that's inspired me and that I grew up holding in very high regard.
Yeah. You know, it's quite interesting because for years I've been listening to one of their songs, Don't Cry, I think it was No Need to Cry, whatever that song was, their famous hit single. I've been listening to it, a cover by Cradle of Filth, the band. I've always listened to their version, and then when I studied the Sisters of Mercy, I'm like, oh shit, this is their song. No Time to Cry.
Yeah.
I had no idea it was their song. I was like, what? So that was pretty cool. You know, look, at this point, most artists I feel would have the career you've had so far already is to me any musician's dream. But to go even further, you started a new band, Night by Night. Like you're just nonstop. Can you tell me about
that. I think, yeah. The funny thing was that when I was the first forays of Night by Night, even when I started before I got into Sisters, and even when I got the Sisters job, I was so keen to create because with the Sisters I was like, well, am I going to get to write any music? I've got a vision of the kind of music that I want to make, and I love the Sisters. It's just I don't know if I'm going to be asked to be part of a creative process. And I remember at the time even saying, look, guys, I know I've got to come to these rehearsals in a different city from where I was living at the time. Can I come back at the weekend and do my band? Like, even though I was about to get into this like international touring band, I was still like, but can I still do my band? Because I've always had such a passion for creation and for being, I suppose, like the auteur of a project and like writing the lyrics. Even if I'm not the singer, I've always written all the lyrics, or like most of the lyrics. And Night by Night was I wanted to take my passion for like 80s rock and then update it with my passion of more modern kind of metal sounds and more aggressive music. And it took a long time to get to the point where the lineup was sorted and where we actually had the money to record a record. But the album came out and it's self-titled, well, sort of self-titled. It's called NXN's in Night by Night. And I'm really, really proud of that record. I think there's very little I would change about it. I think the songwriting is great. I think the production is great. I think the performances are great. And it was really sad that after that album came out, the band quite quickly folded and is no more. And I think that can happen quite a lot with bands, is that everything goes into that first record, the money, the time, the passion, the hope. And then when that record comes out, as good as it is, for most bands, the first record is just like, right, so that's the first step. Now you've got to do another record. And because you don't get that immediate, like, catapult into success, because it's your first work, it's not gonna have that effect. Very rarely does it have that effect. But then people start getting disillusioned and people start getting irritable that, oh, hang on, we've put all this work in it, yet we're not getting really anything out of it. We have to do another one. But that then tensions rise within the band, and unless everybody's getting paid a wage, which at that point you're kind of not, you're doing it for the love of doing it and for the hope and the belief that it will go somewhere, things can fall apart. And I think that's what happened with Night by Night. But I'm really happy that we got that record out and it's, properly distributed. Anybody in the world can listen to it, and I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, when I listened to that album, I was really impressed myself. It's a great body of work, and it's just it's a testament to your talent, because I'm sitting here talking to you, and you sound like someone who's always the glass half full. You don't seem like a guy that's pretty negative to me. And would you say that about yourself, that you're always optimistic? You're always looking, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think most of us can be that way if we want to. It's a decision. Happiness is a decision. And everything that we've got around us right now, human nature, certainly a lot of the people that I've grown up with and I know, and culturally, is that we tend to look at the things we don't have. And we tend to measure ourselves by the things we don't have and what other people have that we wish we had, whether that be finance or status or whatever it is, rather than sitting and going, isn't this amazing? All the great things that I've got. Or just like taking it to the level of, I've got water, I've got shelter, I'm in a safe country. Like all these things that really we shouldn't take for granted. And I know that sounds sometimes a little bit almost a bit whimsical to be like, hey, shouldn't we just appreciate being able to look at the sky? But I think you should. I think you should be. And you think about, we've already got things in our lives, like for my eyesight, for example, that I would not swap my eyesight for £1 million ever. So I've already got something to me that's worth £1 million. It's worth more than £1 million. So shouldn't I be happy? And I think that's the only way that you can really progress and be happy in life, is to try and appreciate the things around you, because otherwise you're always going to be chasing, when I have that, I'll be happy. And then you get that. And then by the time you get that, you've decided there's something else that you need to be happy. And then it never comes. And then you just go through your entirety of your life never being satisfied because you never stop and actually appreciate what's around you. So what I try and do every day is I set a timer for 3 minutes, and I'll sit down and I'll write down everything that I'm grateful for. After doing that, I come away feeling really energized because I realize I've got so much in my life to be happy about.
Yeah. One of them is being born a musical prodigy.
Thanks, Corbin.
It's insane. And look, to further that point even more, in 2016, you started the group Diamond Black, which I find interesting because upon listening to the singles, you guys still haven't released an album, correct? Am I?
That's that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah,
So why?
yeah.
One of the things I want to know is why the singles format up until this point. Is there an album is there an album coming out in the near future, or are you just guys doing singles? Or
I think the way that music's consumed now, and as you know yourself as someone who works in the industry, is so different. In previous eras, if you brought out a 10 or 12 track album, you could be sure that anyone who liked you would listen to the whole thing back to back over and over and over and over, right? Now you can't be so sure because, and I do it myself, even if a band comes out that I love with a new record, I might listen to a few songs and then be distracted by something else, whether that be, oh yeah, now I want to listen to that old album of theirs, or maybe I want to listen to a different band, or maybe I want to watch something on Netflix. Like there's so much stimuli for us in modern life that we just don't really have the attention span to listen to an entire record anymore. So maybe we might listen to that record maybe over the course of the week or whatever in the background, but it won't be consumed in the way that perhaps I consumed or you consumed music when you were growing up. Of right, got this new record, this is all I'm going to listen to for the next week. So if you suddenly release all 10 or 12 songs at the same time, there's a huge chance that a lot of people won't really listen to half of those songs. So what you have to do is you have to deliver it in a different way. And I found that doing it on a song by song basis was a really great way. It was like releasing episodes of a TV show. And then people were super stoked about, oh, I can't wait until the next one comes out. And we'd even take it further to the point where we'd release a physical version and there'd be a B-side, which would be like an acoustic version of the track. But right at the end, like maybe 20 seconds after the song had ended, there would be a little like distant, far away sounding like teaser of the next song to come. And so people are like, oh my God, what's that? And you've created that excitement. Whereas if you'd just given them it all at once, they'd be like, actually, it's kind of too many songs for me to listen to here. Whereas now you've brought back that excitement of, oh wow, I really value this artist's output because they're kind of rationing it. So I think if you're a good way for a band to, I think, release an album, a new band to release an album, is to do a series of singles. And then culminate it later in an entirety of an album where there's a few songs people haven't heard, but then there's like extras like B-sides and acoustic versions and like live versions and that create something that people feel excited about investing in as an album. And by that point, they know they love you enough to buy and listen to the album. Whereas as a new artist, maybe they don't really have time for you unless you completely blow them away. So yeah, I think there's a different ethos now to releasing than there was before.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way. That's actually pretty smart. Because I love all the singles, so it's just got me thinking like, because I'm very much an old school album guy. I had CDs. I still collect vinyls. It's just like I love listening to an album, and so listening to those singles, I was like, I hope there's an album coming. I want to listen to an album, and yeah. So
yeah, well, I think. No, I get it, man. And as an album fan myself, part of writing the songs is often you think about where does that song go on a record. You write a song in a certain style because you think, oh, that's a real kind of start of side 2 song, or that's a real, not the last track, but the penultimate track, or that's a real album opener. And you can't really think about them that way anymore, or certainly not as much, because people won't consume it in the way that you want it to be consumed. They will just listen to the songs how they want to, when they want to, as part of a playlist, juxtaposed to songs that you can't imagine that they would be between, um, or just between like again other activities. They might be listening to your song and you're like, oh my god, I put so much work into that part, and they're not really listening that deeply because maybe they're playing um, Minecraft at the same time or whatever it is. So yeah, I think you have to let go a little bit of that kind of control of, because the way that the song is going to be consumed, you have no idea.
Yeah. Well, that actually that reminds me of the whole thing. I'm not sure if you heard about it, but start of the year or last year when Adele, the singer, she she told Spotify to make her album play consecutively, like instead of shuffle, have Spotify on the free version play her album from start to finish because it's meant to be consumed that way. So
Oh
yeah,
wow.
Spotify turned her album. Yeah.
Oh wow.
So
So
yeah.
did that mean? Oh, that's really cool. So yes, she obviously held that in high regard. She considered that her body of work is to be consumed in a certain way,
Yeah.
and I guess to be able to have that level of control is awesome. But isn't that weird that something that was just taken for granted X amount of years ago is now a huge privilege that you could only have if you're an artist of a certain size?
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. It's very, yeah, because to me, like I said, ever since I was a teenager, I've been an album guy, and like, you know, like obviously sometimes I'll be in a mood to listen to a playlist or songs, but for the most part, I love the feeling of respecting the artist's work and effort by listening to the whole thing. It's like they made an album, they put their money into it, they put their time into it. The least I can do is listen to it once, start to finish. It's just like I feel like as a fan, I'm kind of indebted to the artist to at least do that. But that's just my opinion.
Oh man, I mean that's really really good of you to do that, and I think that shows a lot of respect that you have for music, and a lot of integrity that you want to consume the work in the manner in which it was intended. Because without being so extreme, because music doesn't necessarily have that narrative form, but it's a bit like watching a movie with the scenes all in the wrong order,
Yeah,
and you don't really get what the artist was trying to tell you. It's not as extreme, obviously, because music doesn't have that linear narrative form. But in some ways, like I really, really agree with that. And I think if I've got an album of songs, there are certain songs that I probably want the listener to hear first before they hear other ones, because I'm like, yeah, okay, so song seven, it is my band and it is my expression, but it doesn't encapsulate the entirety of what I'm trying to do as an artist in the same way as maybe track one does.
yeah, yeah. No, yeah, it's always I feel I'm very exclusive in that mindset. A lot of my friends, they don't care. They're like, oh, I'll just listen to singles, and which is fine. Obviously, I do the same sometimes, but yeah, I don't know. I'm just always in the old school mindset, so can't really help it.
No,
um,
I appreciate that, man. So listen,
um,
listen, 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 dude. Couple,
yeah,
couple of things. I think I've got to go and do another interview at 11, which is in a couple of minutes' time. So I'm going to have to sign off. Um, but secondly, I really appreciate how much research and passion that you've put into this interview. I'm really well informed, man, and I feel touched that you've spent time listening to my music as well, all across the board. It really means a lot to me because sometimes you do interviews and people just don't they don't really I haven't really done the research. Um, Whereas this is I could keep talking to you for a long time, man, because I feel like we're really resonating and you've done your work. It's really cool, and you're obviously a true music fan.
yeah,
I wanted to just quickly say to you, there's a couple of other songs that I've collaborated on that have come out in the last sort of 6 months or so that I'd like you to hear.
yeah.
I don't know if I can write them down for you
Yeah, I'll
or you
write it
can
down.
write them down. Okay, cool. One is called Dead Zone,
Yep.
and it's on Spotify, and it's I did it with a band called Esprit de Air, which is but if I guess if you just put in Dead Zone Ben Christo because it's feat Ben Christo, you'll find it.
Yep.
And the other one was called Still Life to Die For. Still Life to Die For. And I
Yep.
did that with Lord of the Lost. Lord of the Lost. Again, check those two songs out because those are the kind of the most recent things that I've done. Um, I sang lead vocal on both of them and wrote the lyrics for both of them and the vocal melodies. With Dead Zone, that's like a collab vocal with Kai, the guy who sings, so he sings the first verse, I sing the second verse, whatever. But I wrote the vocal melodies and the lyrics. So those are like the two newest things I've done, and I think I'm really proud of them, and I'd like you to hear them.
And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks, Corbin. Appreciate it.
All right, have a good one.
You too. Cheers, dude.